Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just take a few seconds for everybody to join the webinar before we kick off. You are very welcome to this Cultural Enterprises and Substract webinar, looking at Substract's recent benchmarking report. For those of you who have not read it, and I cannot believe you might not have done already, Ash has very kindly dropped the link to the report in the chat. It's there for you to peruse. Maybe have a look at it once we finish the webinar. I would not want you to miss anything on screen. So my name is Tom Dawson. I'm the Director of Digital for the Association for Cultural Enterprises. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Ash and Theo, who I will hand over to very shortly to give their presentation. For those of you who do not know Substract too well, Substract are a digital agency specializing in the arts and culture sector. They've partnered with over 70 cultural organizations in Europe and North America, designing and building websites and digital products. They provide a range of consultancy services supporting organizations with their digital activity, including things like content strategy, analytics, user research, and digital strategy. To give you an idea of some of their clients, they work with PAC NYC, Malmö Opera, Henry Moore Foundation, Scottish Ballet, Kettle's Yard, Leeds Heritage Theatres, the National Theatre, South Bank Centre, Shakespeare's Globe. So basically, you can't move on the South Bank of the Thames, but for bumping into Substract, you've got that nicely covered. So I'm just going to mention a couple of housekeeping rules before we kick off. Along the bottom, you will have options for captions if you so desire. There is also a chat and Q&A function. I'd encourage you to add questions in the Q&A button along the bottom of the screen at any point during the chat, and we'll have about 15 minutes for questions for Ash and Theo later on in the session after their presentation. Ash, Theo, welcome. Pleasure to see you. Over to you both.
Thank you so much, Tom. Pleasure to be here. As Tom said, my name's Ash. I'm Exec Director at Substract. Theo is our technical web analyst. And we, along with a number of colleagues, produced this report that you can see on the screen at the moment. Published in April. It was our first cultural website performance benchmark report. And this was a comparative analysis of the website traffic data of 76 cultural organizations' websites. And yes, as this photo suggests, we published it as an actual document as well as digitally. It's a beautifully designed thing. Thanks to my colleagues Dan and Selena for designing it. If you see any Substract folks at any of the conferences over the summer, we can probably give you a copy, but otherwise there will be a link going into the chat with a link to the landing page on the Substract website where you can download the report in full. So this report grew out of a question that we are asked on a really regular basis here at Substract, and that is, how are we doing compared to other cultural organizations? So much of the benchmarking data that is available around digital experiences is from industries that bear little or no relation to the specific constraints, priorities, and idiosyncrasies of the cultural sector. This has also been the experience of many of us at Substract. Lots of us have worked in-house, managing or being involved in looking after institutional websites. And we hope that this report will help support conversations about website priorities. It will hopefully help the folks managing cultural websites understand what good might look like. And we also hope it will start to throw a light on sector-wide opportunities and challenges. And it's been really great to hear from people who have already started to use the report in some of these ways to push conversations towards particular priorities, to reframe conversations with senior stakeholders, to help inform where they're going to be focusing their budget and resources over the coming year. Before I get into the findings, I just want to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the report. So we looked at the website performance data for 76 cultural websites. That data we looked at was for the whole of 2023, so from the 1st of January to the 31st of December 2023. That encompassed just over 110 million user sessions. So it's a pretty robust data set. Those 76 organizations were all based in either Europe or North America. And they included performing arts organizations, collections-based and heritage organizations. They also included both touring and building-based organizations, so a real diversity of different types of organizations in there. And we divided the 76 organizations into 3 groups based on traffic to their respective websites. So small group, those were websites that received 500,000 or fewer sessions. Medium group, between 500,000 and 1.5 million sessions. And the large group with websites that received more than 1.5 million sessions across 2023. The 76 organizations we looked at split fairly equally across these 3 groups, with slightly more in the small group and slightly fewer in the large group. And all of the numbers that I am going to talk about today are averages across all 76 organizations that we looked at. If you want to look at just the results for a specific group, so you want to just look at average order value on mobile for medium-sized organizations, then breakdowns by group across all of the metrics we looked at can be found in the report document. The back few pages, just like the budget, has got all of the data tables breaking down everything by group. And lastly, the report document is structured into 4 main sections. Overall, chapter looks at traffic numbers, device types, landing pages, where your traffic is coming from, things like that. The commercial section looks at performance related to experiences that are focused on generating commercial revenue, so ticketing, retail, how different traffic sources are converting. The section on donations and memberships splits out and examines pages and journeys focused on securing donations and selling memberships. And lastly, we have a short section which looks at engagement metrics and engagement-focused content and experiences. That is content and experiences which are not focused on directly selling something. Now, this last area is a shorter section and is going to be a big focus for the next version of the report. And we're actually looking for a cohort of organizations to help inform what that expanded focus will look at. So if you're interested in those types of things, then please get in touch. We'd love to involve you in those conversations. So, some findings. The report is a fairly detailed document. There is a lot of information in there. I'm also aware there are a lot of different types of organizations represented on the call today. So I'm going to try and highlight 3 findings that we think are most important for most organizations to consider, regardless of the type or size of organizations. And we'll also point to some examples of the most effective organizations and websites that we looked at through our analysis. And then, as Tom said, there'll be time for a Q&A at the end. So please do put your questions into the Q&A function. So if you take one thing away from this presentation, I hope it is this. Mobile is the primary mode of experience for most of your users. Mobile is not just for young people. It's not just for people who are browsing. It's not just for people who are getting your emails. It's not just for people who are on the move. Mobile is how most people are accessing most cultural websites. Even the organization in our study with the lowest proportion of mobile traffic still saw 50% of their website traffic coming from mobile devices, whilst the organization with the highest proportion saw 82% of their traffic from mobile devices. Now, this shift has been coming for most of the past decade, but we would say, based on the work we've done in this report, we are now undeniably in a mobile-first world. Specifically, mobile is now responsible, on average, for over 69% of traffic to cultural websites, and that's up from 67% in 2022. Mobile is responsible for the majority of ticket transactions, the majority of overall revenue, and is only a couple of percentage points on average from being responsible for most of your donation, and membership transactions as well. However, across the websites we looked at, mobile conversion rates for ticket sales were on average 68% lower than desktop conversion rates. There may be some behavioral reasons for this. Research has previously shown that some users prefer to browse on mobile and then make a purchase on desktop, particularly for higher value purchases. But we would say that, mobile is how most people are doing most things with most cultural websites. At the Digital Works conference that we hosted earlier this year, UX and optimization expert Craig Sullivan said, your digital experience is only as strong as its weakest link. So some people may have a difficult experience on mobile and then switch to desktop. Lots of people will have a difficult experience on mobile and give up with you altogether. So we would say, take one thing away, the importance of mobile. Secondly, related to Craig's observation, this perhaps shouldn't be a revelation, but it was striking to see just how little traffic arrives at cultural websites via the homepage. Yet it is still the homepage about which many cultural website managers have to field the most requests. The vast majority of traffic, over 80% on average, is landing on your website via a page other than the homepage. We know that users form first impressions almost instantly. Some research has indicated that this happens in less than 5 milliseconds. So it's important to ensure that the pages that are acting as entry points to your website provide a strong, consistent, and useful experience for your users. And this moves us on to our third and final key finding for today. If the last finding was about where your users are entering your site, this one looks at the step before that. This finding highlights the importance of organic search and email, but more broadly talks to understanding how users are arriving at your site. So let's walk through this slightly too colorful chart, with the caveat that no attribution model, that is the way in which sales are assigned to a particular type of traffic, is perfect. So what this chart is showing us is organic search is responsible on average for the biggest proportion of both traffic and revenue. But I also wanted to call out the relative value of traffic from email and paid search. Email is responsible for Email is responsible for 6.6% of traffic on average, and paid search is responsible for 4.4%, but they are responsible for 11.7% and 7.2% of revenue on average. So they are hugely over-indexing when it comes to the amount of revenue they're responsible for. And really what this finding is saying is that we encourage every organization to really look in depth at your acquisition channels and how they're performing, and then reflect on that in the context of your strategy. Because each acquisition channel, we would expect, would have a particular role. And it's really important for organizations to understand the role that those acquisition channels are playing and whether that aligns with what you expect and need them to do. Because as an example, what the data is showing us is that social traffic is not here to buy. Social converts at by far the lowest rate and is responsible for a tiny proportion of revenue. And that's maybe fine if you're using social for top of funnel or engagement focused work. But if you're expecting social traffic to directly drive revenue, we'd really encourage you to check and see if that's happening, because based on the numbers that we're seeing, that's not happening for most organizations. I just want to go through a few other findings in the report. So it's really encouraging to see the volume of transactions and overall revenue significantly increasing year on year from 2022 to 2023, particularly after a disastrous few years for the cultural sector as a result of the impact from the pandemic. And I think these shifts further emphasize the importance of mobile experiences. So mobile ticket transactions were up a third on 2022, and mobile ticket revenue was up 44.9%. Comparatively, desktop transactions were up 18.2% and revenue was up 30%. This is further emphasizing the importance of the shift to mobile. It was also really encouraging to see the volume of retail products sold and the level of retail revenue significantly rising compared to 2022. So the number of products sold up over 43%, the amount of revenue up over 62%. However, when looking more closely, there are some indications there is still work to do in further increasing the effectiveness of cultural online retail experiences, because it looks like on the whole, cultural organizations are still underperforming some broader comparative metrics, such as retail specific conversion rate. So for the sites we looked at, the overall average conversion rate for retail sales was 1.6% on mobile and 2.33% on desktop, which is lower than sort of internet-wide benchmarks of what good looks like. A really encouraging metric to see was the basket abandonment rate. That is, what percentage of users didn't complete a transaction once they had something in their basket. A study by the Baymard Institute indicates that an internet-wide benchmark for basket abandonment was around 70%. However, the cultural organizations in our study saw on average a basket abandonment rate of just over 40%. And I think this indicates that once we've got someone to commit to a product choice, they are committed. That they're more likely than not to complete that transaction. Although, as we've mentioned elsewhere, and we'll come to this more in a moment, there is definitely a big opportunity to smooth the path up to that moment. Overall, on average, we saw a drop in both the number of donations and in the amount of revenue coming from donations compared to 2022. This is perhaps not an enormous surprise. During the pandemic, cultural organizations mobilized really effective fundraising campaigns, and the impetus and momentum around this messaging has died down somewhat. Additionally, organizations are reporting donor fatigue from audiences, and people are suffering economically cost of living pressures. So you can understand that visitors and audiences perhaps both see less reason to give and are materially less able to do so. However, there was some good news when it comes to donations. We saw a large increase, over 40%, in the average value of mobile donations compared to 2022. There is still a discrepancy between the average values of donations made on desktop and mobile, but this shift indicates that that gap is closing. Again, further emphasizing the importance of mobile, the shift in user behavior towards mobile. So benchmarks and averages are useful and interesting, but we also wanted to identify some examples of organizations who are performing above those averages, who are performing most strongly across some of the metrics that we've talked about. I want to share some specific examples from 3 cultural organizations who are performing strongly in terms of commercial performance or the effectiveness of their mobile experiences. And I'll talk specifically about the performance of these examples. And we've also tried to identify some lessons which could perhaps be applied more broadly. Now, nothing that I'm about to share is rocket science, but they are all good examples of basic principles applied thoughtfully and applied well. So firstly, let's look at Glasshouse International Centre for Music, which is an iconic building in Gateshead. Every year they welcome around 2 million people for gigs, concerts and classes. And when it comes to ticket conversion rates, the Glasshouse site is performing at nearly double our study averages. So on mobile, that means their ticket conversion rate is 5% compared to the 2.26% average rate across the study. And on desktop, their ticket conversion rate is 9% compared to a study average of 4.59%. Now, there's no one big thing that the Glasshouse are doing differently. There's no silver bullet. Rather, it is a number of small, thoughtful elements to their approach that we think may be the reason for their especially high levels of performance. Specifically, their navigation is really clear, especially on mobile, where they've significantly simplified it. They use really, really user-focused language and groupings when it comes to how they present their program. They have hundreds and hundreds of events happening every year, a huge range of different types of events. But the way in which they make that very broad and potentially quite confusing program coherent for users is by using language and groupings that is really meaningful and matches what the user is looking for. And lastly, all of the user interface and user experience choices that they've made around the ticket transaction path are really clear, simple, and straightforward. So that's clear use of calls to action, ensuring key information is presented to the user when they need it, and then not bombarding the user with unnecessary distractions once the user has chosen to buy. Next, I want to look at Sadler's Wells. Sadler's Wells is one of the world's leading dance companies, performing to hundreds of thousands of people each year in their theatres in London and on tour. Now, they take almost 54% of their donations on mobile. And again, clarity and simplicity is key here. They don't mess around with language or content. They make it very, very clear how to donate. And then once the user has made that choice to donate, the donation experience itself is as streamlined as possible. There's no asking for any unnecessary data. They don't ask for unnecessary personal data. They don't ask for communication preferences. They don't try and sell you a membership. They've chosen to pursue a quick and lean approach to this user experience, and particularly on mobile, it's really paying off. And lastly, I want to look at Opera North's membership experience on mobile. Now, Opera North is a touring company with its base in Leeds. And in 2023, over 63% of their memberships were sold on mobile. And again, the lessons here are things that most cultural organizations could be drawing inspiration from. Their membership content is really benefits focused. The way that they have laid out that content recognizes how people read on a screen, and particularly on a mobile device. They've used bolding, they've used bullet points. And then once you've chosen to purchase a membership, that membership transaction experience is extremely straightforward. So we believe that the main lessons from these examples can really be summarized in this first point. They all make it simple, clear for the user. More specifically, they use meaningful and user-focused language. That means they don't use internal jargon, and instead they use language that matches what the user expects, what the user understands, and in that moment, what the user is looking for. The structure and navigation of these sites is straightforward and, again, understandable. And by that, we don't just mean the options in the primary navigation, but all of the ways that the user can move around the site make sense to the user. These examples have all taken a thoughtful approach to content design. That means that they've thought about what content and information is going to be most effective and useful for their users. And they have presented that content in a way that is straightforward to engage with. And lastly, they have, where possible, shortened, clarified, and simplified key user journeys. They've focused on the key thing that the user wants to do in any particular moment, and they've made that as straightforward as possible by stripping out unnecessary form fields, confusing language, ambiguous calls to action, additional upsells, things like that. So, next steps. Even if you don't want to read the report, I'd really encourage you to pay attention to sort of 3, 4, and 5 on this list. Carry out some user testing on your website with some users, especially on mobile. That will very quickly show you where there are opportunities for improvement, and really consider what you can simplify. Users are time poor. If most people are engaging with your site on mobile, they are likely to be distracted at the moment they are doing that. How can you make your experiences more simple? It feels like we do probably still have a way to go as a sector until we're in a situation where we can say we really, truly, deeply understand how our users are engaging with all of our digital products and services. But user testing can be done really cheaply and relatively easily. And that is, we would argue, the starting point for the most effective digital content, digital experiences. If you don't feel like you have the time, expertise, or capacity to carry out this work, then my colleague Katie and her team have a lot of experience supporting organizations to really understand what can be done to improve things for their users. And we are already starting to think about next year's edition of the report. Theo and I will be working on it again. We've got sort of 3 key focuses. So we want to have more organizations involved. We want a real focus on accessibility, and we will likely be partnering with an accessibility focused agency on that work, who work with the cultural sector. And as I mentioned right at the top, we want to have a much deeper and broader analysis of engagement focused experiences and content. So if you're interested in that area, then please do get in touch, because we want to ensure that the work we're doing in that area is useful. So that's quite enough from me. I wrote much of the report. Theo did much of the analysis. We'd love to answer your questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ash. That was really interesting. And I do encourage everybody to have a look at the report. It's a beautifully presented report and very easy to digest, which I know is not easy necessarily. So please feel free to use the question and answer box. I can guarantee if you're thinking of the question, I'm sure you are not alone. So we've got one already, actually. Ash from Grant in the chat. How important is iconography use and design for the mobile experience, where space is at a premium and you need a way to signal wayfinding and communicate unique selling points and propositions? Good question.
Yes, so iconography is an interesting area, because I think it can be a very, picture tells 1,000 words. However, everyone does not necessarily understand the same thing when you see an icon. And that's particularly true if you have audiences which sort of transcend national boundaries. Iconography that means something for a English-speaking Western audience may not be as immediately perceivable or understandable for people from a different background. So yes, I think iconography can be a really effective way to maximize limited screen real estate, but I would say you need to be really careful that you've tested that with a diverse range of users to ensure that everyone understands the same thing by the icons that you're choosing to use. I saw a tweet earlier today, actually, and someone was talking about giving tech support to their grandma's iPad, and the grandma was saying, well, I don't have a Wi-Fi icon and I don't have a camera icon. All I've got is a fan and a hot water bottle. Because what the granddaughter was seeing very obviously is a Wi-Fi icon and a camera icon. The grandma was not understanding that that's what the pictures were showing her. So yes, but with caution would be my short answer to that.
Great, thank you, Ash. You mentioned at the end as well about user testing. So I'm wondering if nobody has done that before,
yeah,
how do you go about doing that, having never done it before?
So there's lots of good resources online, and maybe I can share some with Tom to share in the follow-up to this, because user research and usability testing is can be a very complex area, but also you can do it. So it's called sort of guerrilla user testing is the easiest way to do it, and that is literally grabbing some people, sitting them down with a phone or in front of a computer and asking them to use a website, asking them to complete particular tasks and just watching them do it. That is, I would say, the quickest and easiest way to do user testing. Of course, you probably want to have asked yourself some questions before you start grabbing colleagues or family members to do that, because user testing is most effective when you're being specific. So rather than just saying, use our website, that's probably not going to give you much in the way of sort of actionable insights. You maybe want to go, okay, we want to really understand what our membership purchase experience, how that's working on mobile for someone from an event page. And that gives you enough of a scenario that you're trying to test. You then probably want to get a few users that you're going to test with. There's been some interesting research actually that shows that you will uncover most of the serious issues with your user experience by testing with about 8 users. So you don't need to be recruiting tens and tens of people, because actually the quality and number of insights that were gained by testing with more and more people didn't appreciably increase until you started testing again with about 50 people. So unless you can commit to testing with 50 people, 8 people will be fine. As ever, I would encourage that's a sort of diversity of people with different needs, different levels of understanding of your organization, different levels of sort of digital confidence. But sitting and watching someone use a website is the quickest and easiest way to work out what's really broken with it.
Great. It's a really great answer, Ash. And it's good. It's reassuring you don't need to have huge numbers of people to.
You don't need to have a PhD, but you can do a PhD in this stuff. But you don't need to have huge numbers of people either. No.
Thank you. I'll get to some of the questions in the Q&A box in a second. But I think Jennifer Murphy, I think you raised your hand. If I can give you the mic, if you are happy to speak, just drop me a note in the chat, and I can come to you in a second. Otherwise, we've got a question from Rebecca. Are there any good white label sites that you'd recommend for heritage? I know Owen's added in a recommendation there as well.
Yes. So I'm assuming by this that the question is sort of about website as a service, white label sites that are giving you, 75% complete something that you can then brand for your organization. The short answer is not really, because of it's often the specific requirements of heritage and cultural organizations that make things like your Squarespaces and things like that not fit for purpose, because often organizations will need a level of flexibility or a specific set of functionality that isn't available through these sorts of white label sites. There are new suppliers coming onto the market that have more of this sort of offer. The ones that I've seen have been more focused on performing arts organizations. It's a question we ask ourselves at Substract, is there something that we could provide that could be more of an out of the box solution for people? We've not invested the time or efforts that would be required to build that yet. So not that I'm aware of. Sorry, that's not a very helpful answer.
Thank you. Another good question here is you've taken such quite a broad group of organizations to create a benchmark, different types of organizations, not just in the UK and Europe. Curious to know if you've also seen any significant cultural differences too, or is the World Wide Web experience really that? Is it worldwide? I mean, have you had a chance to segment that in any meaningful way there?
We haven't hugely dived into the territory specific differences. It's what we have noticed is that, for example, average donation amounts are higher in North America than they are in the UK, and then much higher than they are I'm based in Sweden and Scandinavia, but that's because of the sort of historical funding mix and priorities and relationships that have been formed in those sectors. It's what was interesting was to see. So if we go back to our sort of number one finding, mobile first, that is true across all countries and across all demographics that we looked at. And it's interesting as well, slight tangent, but I'm currently involved in a research project with a Dutch theatre that's doing a collaborative thing with young people in Morocco. and the mode of internet access for the Dutch teenagers and the Moroccan teenagers is a smartphone. And much as with media habits, I suspect that digital habits are ingrained fairly young. And I would, that almost total shift to mobile, I think, is imminent.
Great, thank you much. Another good question here. The report highlights the importance of organic search as an acquisition channel. What might we need to be thinking about with the implementation of AI-generated info within Google results pages, for example? That could impact users being driven to websites.
Yeah, really good question. And it was something, we were aware that Google were making moves in this direction when we were writing the report. We published the report in April. 1 month later, Google have their I/O conference where they announced the sort of insertion of AI functionality into all of their products. So I would say there's a few things here. Number one is really understanding the acquisition mix for your audience, for your users. And if organic search is a very big number in that mix, which it probably is, then you probably need to start thinking about potential mitigation strategies. Some of the commentary that I've read around the introduction of AI answers into Google search have indicated they expect an across the board reduction in organic search by about 20%. And now maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's not a problem if most of your organic search is trying to find out your opening times or directions to your venue, or what ages your exhibitions are appropriate for. If those questions are being answered correctly by Google's AI features, then that's probably not a problem. I think the biggest impact may be for organizations that have really been producing content geared towards an SEO strategy, helping to answer homework questions, research questions, things like that. If Google is now going to be able to sort of answer those to a good enough degree in line, as it were, without someone leaving the Googleverse, then that is going to hit your traffic that you're getting from organic search. It's worth saying, since Google have launched this new functionality, it's not very good so far. But all the other AI stuff we've seen out of the world has sort of got very good very quickly. Theo, I want to bring you on this though, because you're more focused on sort of search and SEO than I am.
I was probably just going to mirror what you had to say, actually. Kind of just hearing about people's experiences with it so far. It's not been too accurate at really providing much help within search results itself at the moment. But yeah, I think it might have some impact over the next year or so. But yeah, I think it's not a huge concern at this point, really.
It's worth saying as well, Google are only rolling it out to North America at the moment, but their aim is by the end of the year, it will be rolled out to 2 billion users. And if Google's rollout strategy is in the past anything to go by, after North America, it'll be Europe and the Middle East that they'll focus on.
Wow, that puts some of our kind of go live projects in the shade, doesn't it? Okay. Another really good question here. I was interested about your stats on landing pages. So you mentioned the importance of landing pages and to not focus solely on your home page. So do you have an example of the perfect or ideal landing page? Do you have any tips when building successful landing pages?
So, I mean, the perfect landing page depends slightly on the reason someone is coming to your site. So if they're coming because, I don't know, this is a silly example, but it's simple. They're a Taylor Swift fan. Your venue has got Taylor Swift playing. They've Googled Taylor Swift tickets in, wherever, Edinburgh, and you're able to fill that need. they're going to land on that page, make it as easy as possible for them to get the key information, which is probably around price, date, time, and then to give them a clear call to action. For most cultural organizations, the intent is perhaps less clear cut than that. And also most cultural organizations don't have the internal capacity to be able to create landing pages for every single type of different intention that a user might have. So I think it's important to look at your current website traffic data, understand where users are entering your site at the moment. You can infer some intent by what they then do next. So is everyone landing on your what's on and then going straight to your about page because they're trying to find opening times, or is everyone landing on a particular page and then going straight to a get in touch page? You need to understand where people are entering your site and what their primary intention is at that moment. And then you can start to put together landing pages and content and functionality that meets those needs. But I would say the perfect landing page is a page that gives the user what they want really clearly. What the user wants will be different for each organization. And you can do lots of things. You can, the sort of quick and dirty user testing that we described is probably less good for this type of insight. There are tools like Hotjar and other sort of micro survey tools that you could run on your most popular landing pages with a few options, why are you here today sort of thing. That will give you more qualitative data to go with the traffic data that you'll be getting.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ash. Got time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, of course.
One more from the Q&A, and I've got one to ask you both before we wrap up. Another thing that I particularly noticed someone was asked about, you mentioned that social traffic does not tend to drive revenue. Does this stand for paid social? Do you have a breakdown between the organic social and paid social?
Theo, this is definitely a question for you.
Yeah. We haven't specifically broken it up into paid and organic social for this report this year, but it's certainly something we can look at in the future. What I do remember though, from kind of looking at the data, is there wasn't much of a difference between organic and paid social when it came to revenue and kind of transaction on the site there. The behavior from users that came from both was quite similar.
Thank you, Theo. So before we wrap up, if the beautiful people watching this webinar go away and they speak to their teams and colleagues straight after this call, what is a piece of low-hanging fruit, a quick win they could go away from this call and say, right, we could implement this now to improve our website? Do you have
I would
a
say
recommendation each, I would ask?
Well, so I would say do some user testing on mobile. That's number one recommendation, because that will immediately furnish it. People will be getting stuck at the same sort of thing. The same things won't be making sense to them. I would say work out what you can take away. That's the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. And if you create issues by taking stuff away, suddenly people are ringing up asking questions about the content that you've removed. You can always put it back, but actually so many digital experiences are quite bloated. We always end up putting slightly too much into them. And so I would say get out the scalpel and really try and pare back your key user journeys to the bare minimum and see what that does to their effectiveness. But I think the real powerful thing that people can do is some user testing.
Good.
Right.
Theo,
yeah, what about you?
From my point of view, I would say, one of the the most important things you could do really is to make sure that your Google Analytics is fully set up. So if you do have any questions or any interest in something specific that takes part on the website, you can look into your data and answer that question. Especially with the transition from Universal Analytics to GA4, we have seen some clients have struggled a little bit to get that set up and run completely. So yeah, I would say take a look into your GA4 and see that you have everything there that you need.
Brilliant. Okay, I think we've run out of time. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Ash. Thank you, Theo. That was really interesting. The link to the report is in the chat. We will follow up on an email with the slides, with a link to the report again. There's going to be a post-webinar survey, which was going to go in the chat just now. That will be followed up as well. We'd love to hear your feedback. That's really important to us. Before we go, quickly, what's coming up with Cultural Enterprises? 10th of July, we've got an event with the Museum Association where we are holding a panel discussion on Money Talks, Income Generation for Museums. We've got a Filming at Cultural Venues event coming up, which is going to be fantastic if that's your area, and a Catering at Cultural Venues event at the fantastic St Fagan's National Museum in Wales in September. They're on our website. Go to the What's On page. That's it from us now. Just say thank you to Ash and Theo again. Go and check out their report on the Substract website. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.